Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Momentum Boost. I'm, of course, your host, Adrienne Gold Davis, and I am delighted to be spending this time with you. So, in this month at Momentum, we're focusing on the value of learning and growth. And we're all hungry to learn and to grow in all areas of Jewish life. And a core value at Momentum is to develop a connection to Israel. And tonight, we are doing just that through a very special woman with a very special voice. We're going to be speaking with actor, producer, writer Noa Tishby and discussing what inspired her to write her new book, Israel, a simple guide to the most misunderstood country on earth. And we're even going to put up the link in the chat right now so you can go ahead and order it. You know, there are so many myths and misconceptions about our beloved land of Israel. And as we learned recently through Dr. Rachel Fish in our series on anti-Semitism, Israel as a land and as a people has been the target of weaponized language and what often feels like tone deaf and endlessly negative speak. And this, despite the marvels and the innovations of this startup nation that gives back to the world in the most remarkable ways. Well, this has been an extremely difficult few days in Israel, and we at Momentum pray for a swift resolution to these conflicts, and we pray for the safety and the well-being of all the citizens of Israel and, of course, of the world. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Noa Tishby. She's an actress, she's a producer, she's a writer, she's an activist. She was born and raised in Tel Aviv. She served for 2.5 years in the Israeli army before she landed a starring role on the nation's highest rated primetime drama, Ramat Aviv Gimel. She became a household name. She appeared in numerous TV shows and in films and in theater productions and national fashion campaigns. You'll notice she looks exactly like me. Not really. Anyway, before she moved to Los Angeles, where she sold my personal favorite show, the Israeli TV show In Treatment, to HBO. And she made history as the first Israeli television show to become an American series. She also co-produced more than 150 episodes, and she earned herself a Peabody Award, 12 Emmy and Golden Globe nominations, and In Treatment is now back in production. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, at HBO for its 4th season. So she's a passionate political activist. And Noa founded the nonprofit Act for Israel, Israel's first online advocacy organization, and has been widely become known as Israel's unofficial ambassador. And we booked her months ago. So it's shocking and fortuitous to have you with us tonight. Hello and welcome, Noa.
Hi, how are you doing? Hello, everybody.
It's a difficult day. And, you know, given what's happening right now in Israel, I mean, the timing couldn't be better to have you on. You must find yourself like an unofficial ambassador and, you know, the person that everyone goes to with questions. And I mean, I'm imagining that it's situations like these that provoked you to use your voice and write this book. What has today been like for you?
It's not just today. The past month or so, we've seen escalations in specifically in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. It coincided with Ramadan, and it was very clear for anybody who actually understands what's going on that political powers in the region are taking what is essentially a civil dispute over property, right, in a highly contentious neighborhood and turning it into a political circus. It was very clear that Hamas is trying to flame the fires. They've been doing this for a few days now. They've been threatening in doing that. They have fired over 200 rockets into Israel in the past 12 hours or so. So the situation there is very, very tense. Um, Again, Israel's a complicated matter. That particular neighborhood is highly complicated. This is a matter that's been in civil courts for about 20 years. You can see, if you know the facts, you can see that it's very, very complicated. But what Hamas is doing is unexcusable. They're a terrorist organization that is promoting jihad, and they literally want to flame the fires because of the canceled elections and because they want to win political points within the Palestinian people and the Arab world. by being the resistance movement. And they're literally killing civilians and doing this without any qualms. They actually they're trying to cause drama in the region. They're trying to escalate the situation. So you're sitting there as you know, as an Israeli, as an American, as a person who had any kind of political views, and looking at it, and it's highly frustrating. It's frustrating what Hamas is doing, and it's frustrating the misunderstanding again in American media and on social media, with some American representatives, political representatives that are how can you seriously stop talking, just stop condemning Israel if you actually don't condemn Hamas? Like you really, you can't. This is again, this double standard is indeed what had me want to write the book to begin with. And I discussed this in the book, the double standard and the disproportional obsession that people have. Yes, a disproportionate obsession that people have about Israel, when literally, look, it's obviously a disputed neighborhood, but had you had a disputed neighborhood and homes in Kentucky, in London, in anywhere else in the world, nobody would blink an eye. But because it's happening there, the entire world is jumping up and down. And this again, disproportionate obsession about this, the single consistent democracy in the entire Middle East is constantly shocking to me. And you really can't think of anything else other than a particular bias towards a Jewish state, which is.
Let's talk about that bias for a minute. Let's talk about the myths and misconceptions that you, as an activist, are fighting against, and that make their way into the mainstream media and put people, and a lot of Jews, North American Jews, in a position of defensiveness because they're ignorant themselves. So perhaps you can tell me from your perspective as an Israeli and as somebody who has a 35,000-foot view of this, and clearly your own political position, but in terms of myths and misconceptions, what do you consider the top ones that need to be blown out of the water any way that we can?
There are a few. I would say that some of the worst ones would be saying Israel is an apartheid state, which is absurd when you actually know that Arab Israelis have equal rights, and Arab Israelis are in every position of power. Right now, it's literally up to an Arab Israeli party deciding on whether or not a government will be formed. So calling Israel as an apartheid state is disrespectful for anti-apartheid movements in South Africa. Calling Israel a colonialist state. Israel is a refugee state that was literally decolonized from Great Britain. Talking about disproportionate use of force, right? This is happening right now. Unfortunately, Hamas throwing I think it's over 200 missiles right now and rockets from Gaza into cities and towns in Israel, into Jerusalem, which they claim is holy to them, and they're firing at Jerusalem. How odd, right? So Hamas is firing 200 missiles into Israel, and Israel retaliates. Now 20 Palestinians were killed right now. This is terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But unfortunately, this is literally exactly what Hamas wants. So the question of the proportionate use of force, how many missiles will have to fall on the United States before it levels Mexico? One on its way from El Paso. On its way, it'll be done. Like, Israel is a sovereign state. It's the single consistent democracy in the region. It's a stabilizing force in the region, and radicalized Islamist forces within that region constantly trying to flame it up. And it's like, this has been brewing for a few weeks now. It started with, actually I wrote a piece about that in the New York Post last week. So it started with the beginning of Ramadan and with the Palestinian riots, and then with Jewish extremists riots. But then in the American media, only the Jewish extremists demonstrations were picked up. So 200 Jewish extremists are marching down the street, chanting "Death to Arabs," which is horrific. But next to them, there's a demonstration of Arabs and Jews together calling for peace. And the American media and Rashida Tlaib, they literally only talk about these 200 racist Jewish demonstrators that do not represent anybody else in the country. Like, they're an extreme fringe. It's like taking literally the marches in Charlottesville and saying that's America. It boggles the mind.
Do you think people are obsessed with bad news these days, period? Or do you think that Israel will always be the place where people dump their anxieties and their righteous indignation?
I think it's not mutually exclusive, right? I think the Jews are kind of like, hey, we're here to take all your conspiracy minded kind of tendencies and sure, throw them on us, right? Look, as humans on a personal level, each, like, I can give the funniest little example. If I say to you, like, Adrian, we need to speak, right? Your mind immediately goes to like the worst case scenario, right? All I said is we need to talk, right?
Waking up with me. Yes.
So we have a tendency as humans to go to the worst case scenario, to be attracted and addicted to fear, to anxiety, to bad news. Sometimes we literally don't even notice this is happening to us on a personal level. And this is the meta, and this is the in the small scale and in the largest scale. Obviously, this is how news media operates. This is how social media operates. So yes, we are all kind of addicted to it's more shareable. It's, you know, I don't need to tell you all these things. And yes, into that falls to bias and probably anti-Semitism and probably some sort of like preconceived notions that people have about, you know, as I say in the book, I'm like, about them Jews that then fall smack into like, oh, well, then Israel is certainly that too. And they don't even understand that this is their subconscious biases. They're actually driving their opinion about Israel. So it's based on facts, on feelings, not facts.
Well, one of the things I noticed when I read the book was that you approach these very serious minded, weighty matters with a light touch, with a sense of humor, as though you're trying to sneak in under the radar and have people see you as a woman with humor and grace and all of those things. But what you're talking about is extraordinarily serious. So when you look at the way the media covers Israel, when you look at typically the kind of books that have been out there, the extreme positions that people can rage against, was part of the style with which you wrote that book to speak in a new voice about Israel?
Not consciously. I knew that I wanted to write the story of Israel, to write an explainer of Israel, to write the new case for Israel for a new generation and for people who don't have all the facts, and make it accessible and easy to read for people. But it was clear to me that I'm not going to try and be anybody that I'm not. And this has always been my voice, and this has always been how I've approached things. I think that as humans, again, we laugh at funerals. There's a sense of, you know, laughing is such a huge thing in Judaism. Jewish humor is, I don't, you know, do we need to start naming all the Jewish comedians? There's something in the Jewish DNA that had helped us overcome everything we've overcome as a people for thousands of years. And I think it's ingrained in us, this kind of like sense of humor and sense of self-deprecation and slight irreverence that has helped us as people deal with anything that comes around. In Israel, the level of macabre sense of humor and the acceptance to like joke about everything, and I mean everything, is extraordinary. Like there were a lot of like jokes that I absolutely can never make in America, but in Israel would be like, oh, that's awesome, like on TV, right? So it's who I am. It's how I approach life and everything. I always say that I take my work and the research and the history very seriously, but not myself.
So you're in the entertainment industry, and successfully so, I might add. I mean, you just have a wonderful, wonderful body of work, but you're surrounded by people who are extremely liberal and often biased against Israel. So I'm curious, as a woman personally, what is it like amongst your peers? Do people come to you with questions or with accusations? Do you have to represent all Jews or just all of Israel?
They come to me with both questions and accusations, especially now. And the book is coming out. I'm getting some surprising reactions from some of my friends. I never claim to represent, certainly not Jews. I think one of the most beautiful things about Judaism is how diverse it is, both on traditions and culture and ethnicity and backgrounds and history and whatever. It's super diverse. I always tell my son, when we go to Shabbat, so my son is very like, he likes things the way he likes things, right? And we do Shabbat the way we do Shabbat. And then when we go to friends, I'm like, remember, monkey, everybody does Shabbat differently, right? There's, you know, and Judaism is built such that you can almost never fulfill like every single one of, the commands and the mitzvahs, right? But it's about the essence, and that is what is important for me to carry on. So I wouldn't assume to be representing the Jews. I'm certainly trying to represent. First of all, I'm giving out the history. This is actually how it went down, and by now I've had plenty of historians going through this, and not that I thought I would. I mean, I made sure I don't have mistakes before the book came out, obviously, but these are the facts. Okay, so these are the facts, and this is representing the actual story of how Israel was formed and what Israel's about and what Israel's contributing to the world, as you said, right? I don't want to say that I'm obviously representing Israel, because it's also a highly diverse state, but I'm handing out the facts, and I'm representing definitely myself and a lot of people in Israel, that their voices are not being heard in American media right now.
Well, how do you cope with the fact that we're living in a time where facts mean nothing? We're handing out the facts, which should be enough. It should be Dayenu. It is longer.
That to me boggles the mind. But I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that we're experiencing this in every other country. I mean, we're experiencing this in this country. When I say the big lie, some people hear it this way and some people hear it that way.
Right.
And it's like, no, they're actually facts that we can't. I mean, the vaccination, there's so many things that are in question right now that really shouldn't. That is something that humanity needs to be gravely concerned by, because if we can't agree in reality, we can't wait. This is the end of humanity as we know it. So, and this is a larger conversation than just Israel. Obviously, with Israel, I've seen lack of facts, not interrupting people with forming an opinion. They were like, no, I'm fine. I don't know anything. Like having arguments with friends of mine. And I'm like, oh my God, you literally don't have, any numbers, any factual history, any history. You've got nothing, yet you're so passionately telling me why I'm wrong. And when I bring a fact to you, that doesn't register at all. But again, we're seeing this everywhere. So it's something that I believe that humanity, we all need to, we need to be highly concerned of that.
It's very demoralizing for the thinking human being to move through the world the way it is right now. Talk to me about the 3 Ds, because I found that part of the book to be extremely useful.
Yeah.
It gave me a shorthand. And, to anyone who gets this book and reads it, you'll see that. And when I spoke of your language and the lightness of touch, it didn't in any way diminish the authoritative and cerebral content. It's just you speak so that we can lift quotes out of it. So tell me about the 3 Ds.
So the 3 Ds was kind of like a metrics created by Nathan Sharansky to determine whether criticism of Israel is legitimate criticism of Israel, which again, we're all for. There's nothing wrong with that. And anti-Semitism. So it's delegitimize, demonize, and double standard. So demonize. So a lot of these like BDS websites, you would use language like, ethnic cleansing, horrific, like whatever language that it demonizes Israel and Jews. Delegitimize is delegitimizing the existence of Israel as a Jewish state, which a lot of people are after, and whether they know it or not, they're kind of like it's laced in their conversation. And double standard, which is the mother of everything that's happening in almost all of, at least what I'm seeing on social media with some of my lefty heroes. It's like the double standard. I just tweeted at Ilhan Omar. She called Israeli retaliation for 200 missiles. She called it an act of terrorism. If that's not double standard, I really don't know what is. How can you? Hamas is a terrorist organization that is trying to enact Sharia law and is speaking of jihad. Like it's going for jihad. They have like brigades called Azadin al-Qassam, which are actually jihadi brigades. No criticism for them, Ilhan Omar? None? We're good with that? That's just like the mother of all double standards. That's infuriating.
So you mentioned BDS. Tell me about the damage that BDS has done. Tell me about how you think we can counter that. and where you think they got traction, how you think they got traction.
So it's okay. So BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, is a movement that tries to brand itself as this woke peace. Actually, not peace, because they don't have a mention of the word peace in their entire literature. Justice and so on and so forth. But they are lying. BDS is a movement that is trying to dismantle Israel as a Jewish state, period, end of story. The founder of that movement actually says so themselves. Actually, also quite ironic that the founder of that movement, who is calling for the academic boycott in Israel, is holding a degree from Tel Aviv University. Interesting choice, but fine. Again, double standard. So they're trying to pretend that there's something that they're not. Now, we live in a free country. It's fine. If you want to dismantle Israel, just say so. But that's not what they're doing. They're talking about justice for Palestinians, but they don't talk about justice for Palestinians living in Lebanon, for example, who have zero rights and are living in refugee camps. No, they only talk about justice for Palestinians who are living in Israel. They are, and the thing is this, right? They're acting in plain sight. They're recruiting young Americans, they're recruiting liberals, they're recruiting people like in entertainment, in politics, that don't know what it is they're supporting. And even more so, they don't know who's funding this organization. So BDS on campus is a fully funded political operation that's descending on campuses and like in plain sight, basically convincing people with lies. And what they're doing is like I call it in the book, a slow moving terrorist attack. Right. They're doing it very slowly. They've been doing a great job because they've been operating quietly for over 15 years. And people are like, yeah, it's a problem what's happening on campuses, but like nobody actually realized how bad it is. And they're affecting the young hearts and minds of the new political voter, the new political, like the new voters, the new political activists, like they're affecting those people. And they don't say, oh, we want to dismantle Israel, right? Because if they say that, that'll attract, I would assume, less people, right? So they use all this like kind of woke language and attracting people to their midst. And those people just need to be told the truth. Now, what needs to be done about them? It's a lot. But the reason that one of the reasons that I wrote this book is so this can be handed to any kid who's graduating high school, going into college, who's in college right now and needs to know what to answer when they get attacked with apartheid, genocide, ethnic cleansing, all that bullshit, pardon my French. And they'll have all the answers in that book. I'm very aggressively going after BDS in the book. There's an entire chapter that's dedicated to them. I was joking with the legal department at Simon & Schuster that I'm luring them into a lawsuit. I doubt that they'll do that because everything I say that is 100% true, including all the names, including all the people that behind them, including the congressional hearing that was about their finance by a terrorism expert finance who was like ringing the bells saying, you guys, we need to investigate into this organization because X, Y, and Z, and because of the people that are involved and because of the things that are trying to hide. And yet nothing has been done.
You know, what fascinates me, Noah, is, one of the most basic and fundamental things that we learn as, Jews when we're sort of on a journey to understand our heritage is the line tzedek, tzedek, terdof, right? Justice, justice, you shall pursue. Twice we say it. And yet it feels like that movement has co-opted our language, inverted it as their own. And I find the irony just tragic. It terrifies me. How long has this been bad in your mind? What year did you come to America? And when did what happened as you watched? How did your Israeli identity deepen? And when did you feel finally that you had to speak up?
So it happened quite quickly, actually. And this is that story that I talk about in the book about that actress that asked me if I'm from Israel and how do my family feel about me, that I'm not wearing that whole headgear, like a hijab, basically.
Share the story with our listeners, because I loved that story, needless to say.
So it was probably a couple of months, after I moved to LA, we had this crew of like young actor producers, whatever kind of wannabes, a bunch of wannabes in LA. One of them was an actress who was already successful. She was already well known, already successful, and she went on to become even more successful. And we're hanging out and all that. And she comes up to me and she's like, "Oh, you're from Israel, right?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And she's like, "Wow, that's amazing. So how does your family feel about you?" And I'm looking at her and I'm like, I don't know, what do you mean? And she's like, that you're modern and everything, with all the, head covers. And I'm like, oh, wait, this was the first time I was in my early 20s. And I looked at her and I was blown away. I'm like, we don't, wait, no, we don't, like, we're not, I was like, dude, we're not Afghanistan. Like, what made you think that Israeli, like, what's going on here, right?
Shtisel syndrome. That's what it is.
What is it?
Shtisel syndrome.
No, but it was before Shtisel. She had no reason to actually think that. No, she didn't think, she thought hijab. She actually thought hijab. And what I realized even at the time is that I didn't take it to mean that she's an idiot. I'm like, this is a highly educated, successful person. If that's what she thinks, what does everybody else think? Right? So what I've seen things change, because whereas when I started coming here, it was more about like, oh, Israel's not modern. Like, where's your camel? Like, how, whatever. Like, people didn't realize how modern and diverse and liberal and all of that Israel is. What I've seen in recent years, since BDS had infiltrated the kind of progressive left, is way more sinister misunderstanding. Whereas before it was just kind of like, I can't say that I know everything that's happening in Belize, right?
Right.
But I don't know why I came up with that country. But
I want to read you a question from the audience. Given Israel's history of democracy in a region dominated by monarchs and promoting gender equality in a region where it's lacking, why do you think that there is a waning support for Israel among Americans and Europeans?
I don't know. That's literally why I wrote the book.
It's such an interesting thing. They accuse us of pink washing, of greenwashing. It's just, it's like there's nothing that can be done that isn't.
That's the thing, that it's sometimes, Bill Maher said this, so I'm just quoting Bill Maher, who's my hero, and I'm ready to go on the show at any minute, right? Any minute now. But Bill Maher said that. He said, here's the thing about the Jews. When the Holocaust happened and they're like, why did you go to the slaughter? Why didn't you fight? Why weren't you so weak? And why'd you go to go like that without a fight? When they had Israel and they're fighting, why do you fight? Why do you fight so hard? You shouldn't. He's like, maybe it's just the Jews. I'm like, it's really, really frustrating. This is literally why I wrote the book. And this is the reason why I think that if I can get people to read this book, then people will have all the facts and the answers. If we can actually get out of the bubble and reach with this book larger crowd, I think it can make a difference, because it explains a lot of these things in a way that when you're done with it, you're kind of like, how did I get it so wrong?
Well, you've got an army of momentum women listening to you. I'm going to ask you another question.
Great.
In recent years, why is understanding the history of Israel so important? And you're very much focused on that. What role does history play in shaping the future of Israel and the narratives that define the conversations around it?
Beautiful question. You have to know the facts and the history in order to have a conversation about Israel. Because if you're looking at like, oh, there was a riot today, you don't know how he got to this riot, how he got to this neighborhood, what is going on, what happened, like the history of the Jews, the history of the land of Israel. You have to do this. And when you hear some Palestinian leaders are trying to disconnect the connection of Jews to Israel, whereas, from any religious text to like history, archaeology, this is mental gymnastics of a claim, right? You have to bring it in. You have to bring it in. So you have to talk about the history. You have to, and at some point in the book, I talk about Surah B'nai Israel from the Quran, which talks about the Jews returning to Israel. Like, it's actually in the Quran, right? So there is no question that the Jews are the indigenous people of the land of Israel. There's no question about that. And trying to say anything else is just, it's dumb. I'm sorry, right? So you have to know the history. You have to know what went down in the last 2,500 years. You have to know about World War I, what happened in World War II, and how the the migrants started trickling back as refugees because they had nowhere else to go, like literally nowhere else to go. So and also you have to know how many times Israel called on peace in the region. Like this is from the founding documents of Zionism, calling on all the Arab nations, talking about coexistence. In the Declaration of Independence, it talks about this. Like this is something that's been going on for years, and not knowing it and then saying stuff like ethnic cleansing, right? When like the first government of Israel in 1948 had three Arab people, like, so they were ethnically cleansed straight into government. So you have to know these things in order to answer to anybody who has a claim that is false. So you have to know the history. I made it easy. I made it quick and easy.
You know what you really did, and actually somebody just wrote in, everybody needs to read this book. I think we need to more than read it. We need to buy it. We need to distribute it. I'm telling you that I've read everything out there about Israel over the last 15 years of my career. And I have to say that this was the first book that I felt gave me language that was user-friendly and likable. And yeah, so the book, somebody's asking again, the name of the book is A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth, Noa Tishby's Israel. Yeah, let's both hold it up. I want to ask you one more question, if I may, sort of personal. Do you feel moving forward that it's a possibility that your activism and your passion for Israel will become a part of how you define yourself even more? Or do you plan, is show business your home, producing your home, acting your home? Or do you think there will come a time where you will find yourself politically involved?
It's Israel activism, humanities activism. Like I think that the security and safety of Israel is not a Jewish incentive. It's not for the Jewish people. This is for the world, right? It's a stabilizing force in the region. It needs to be protected. Okay. So doing that has been in the past like 15 years or so, the major core of why I wake up in the morning. This is not something, as I talk about in the book in chapter 1, this turned in from like something I do at dinner parties to like a true calling, like an actual thing that I do. It's obviously way more fulfilling than any role that I've ever played. I've been offered a bunch of stuff recently. I'm way less interested in this. I hope to be able to contribute more in this field. Like there's no world in which I've done this book and great, now let me just go and do a soap opera in America. It's just, there's no world that this happens.
No, it's an interesting thing because the minute we come in really head on in substance, we lose our interest in style, or we like it, but it doesn't feed us. It's like,
Darling, you're very stylish and also substantial. So,
you're both stylish and substantial.
Have both.
You are incredible. I'm really, really grateful that you joined us tonight. And so are the numbers that continue grow all as the half an hour has passed. No, I can't thank you enough. I do hope you'll come back and speak with us again. You have been like informative and clear, and you've given us really, really powerful and important clarifications. And I really do hope you'll join us again in the future.
I would love to.
Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you so much. But for me, Adrienne Gold Davis, and all of your family of Momentum Land, just remember that as we learn and grow and activate ourselves for Israel and learn our Jewish values and foster unity without uniformity and take action in the world, that the highest form of wisdom is kindness. Thank you for joining me. See you soon.